Good evening, everyone. My name is Lara Marita. I am Senior Director for Community Planning and Engagement at the Department of City Planning. We're really excited to have you tonight to talk about the City of Yes for Economic Opportunity Info Session. I would first like to ask if anyone needs interpretation at this meeting, so I'm going to read from the next slide. Please click on the interpretation icon for Spanish, Mandarin, or Cantonese to hear a simultaneous interpretation of the session. During the Q&A, staff will be available to provide language assistance for Spanish, Mandarin, and Cantonese speakers as needed. Spanish, Mandarin, or Cantonese speaking participants may also contact us for additional assistance via email at dcp_dl@planning.nyc.gov.
Por favor, haga clic en el símbolo de interpretación en español, mandarín o cantonés para escuchar la interpretación simultánea de la sesión. Durante la sesión de preguntas y respuestas, estará disponible asistencia para interpretación en español, mandarín y cantonés para quien lo necesite. También nos puede contactar para asistencia adicional al correo dcpcityofyes_dl@planning.nyc.gov. Gracias.
各位朋友，晚上好，请点击同声传译。如果需要华语翻译的话，请点击图标上边收听西班牙语、普通话或粤语的同声传译。在提问环节期间，工作人员会根据你的需要提供西班牙语、普通话或粤语翻译的帮助。如果你需要更多协助，讲西班牙语、普通话或粤语的参加者可以通过电子邮件的方式 dcp_city_of_yes_dl@planning.nyc.gov 与我们取得联系。谢谢 ，Thank you。
Hello， 大家好，呢度係廣東話翻譯。請點擊同聲同傳嘅標誌以收聽會議嘅西班牙文、國語同埋粵語嘅同聲翻譯。在提問嘅環節期間喺 Q&A 咧，工作人員咧將根據需求咧為你提供西班牙文啦、國語啦同埋粵語嘅翻譯服務㗎。如果需要更多嘅幫助，請西班牙語、國語、粵語嘅參與者咧，可以通過電子郵件嘅方式 dcp_cityofyes 下邊一槓 dl@planning.nyc.gov 與我們取得聯絡。多謝大家 ，Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Next slide. I'm going to go over the agenda for this evening. We will start with a presentation and then dedicate the rest of the time to answer your questions and have a conversation around it. For those who have attended DCP info sessions before, tonight's evening event will run very similarly. During the presentation, if you have questions, please, you can submit them through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. During live Q&A, ask questions through two different ways. You can continue typing in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can ask your question live. And if you are dialing in by phone, please press *9 to ask your question during the live Q&A. Next slide. If you end up having any issues with connecting, please use the following phone numbers to be able to connect with us. Instructions to speak at this meeting can be also found under nyc.gov/engage under upcoming meetings. And if you wish to participate in the meeting by phone, the toll-free number is 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099. When prompted, you will be asked for a participation code. Press the # key to skip, and then the password is 1. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please reach out to us via the email that was provided, or you can use the phone numbers above. If you have any questions after the session, please reach out to us at economicopportunity@planning.nyc.gov, and we'll give that email to you again at the end of the event. Next slide. I am now going to pass it off to Edith Suchen, our Executive Director at the Department of City Planning, and she'll offer a few words about the City of Yes.
Hi, thank you, Lara. Good evening, everyone. I'm Edith Suchen, Executive Director at Department of City Planning. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening for our info session on City of Yes for Economic Opportunity. For those of you who have been with us before, thank you for your continued engagement. And for folks who are brand new to this, thank you for joining us. Please feel free to ask plenty of questions this evening. City of Yes for Economic Opportunity, which we'll discuss tonight, is the second of Mayor Adams' 3 City of Yes zoning text amendments. They are collectively aimed at ensuring New York City emerges from the pandemic and into the 21st century a more affordable, more prosperous, a greener and healthier city. To catch you up briefly, the first of these 3 initiatives is City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality. This proposal is aimed at ensuring that New Yorkers can install green energy technologies like solar panels and electric vehicles more easily and safely. I'm pleased to say that just yesterday, the City Planning Commission voted to approve City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality. It will now head to the City Council for their consideration. The second text amendment, which is the subject of today's discussion, is City of Yes for Economic Opportunity. This proposal is about updating our zoning to give all New Yorkers access to vibrant commercial corridors, allowing more New Yorkers to start businesses and create jobs, and making it easier for businesses to grow and expand. Thank you all for tuning in tonight to hear more about this. And if you've joined us in previous info sessions, you may notice some small changes between previous presentations and tonight's. And that's because we've talked to more stakeholders, we've continued to refine the policies that we are putting forward, and we've realized that there are clearer ways to talk about what we are doing. We'll continue to improve upon our work until we refer this initiative to officially kick off the public review process later this fall, at which point community boards, borough boards, and borough presidents will have a chance to more fully make their recommendations as well. Last but not least, later this fall, we'll share more information and host a public information session like this one about City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. This third proposal is about changing our zoning regulations to create more housing across the city. It's great to see so many of you here tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. Back to you, Lara.
Thank you so much, Edith. So now we'll dive right into the presentation. And like I wanted to remind you, you can use the Q&A button to drop questions in, and we'll make sure to collect them. And you can also save your questions for the live Q&A. We'll rotate between raised hands and questions that are written in the chat. So we will make sure to get to as many as we can through that. With that, next slide. I will hand it off to the lead for our City of Yes for Economic Opportunity, Matt Waskiewicz.
Thank you, Lara, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I want to give everyone a big thank you for taking the time to hear about this proposal and to discuss our next steps this evening. My name is Matt Waskiewicz. I am a senior planner here at the Department of City Planning in our Economic Development and Regional Planning Division, and I'm also the lead planner and project manager for City of Yes for Economic Opportunity. I have about 30 minutes worth of presentation for you this evening, so we'll be leaving ample time for your questions at the end. So as Lara mentioned, please feel free to use the chat function throughout as questions occur to you. And we'll also be making this presentation available, as well as a recording of it in its entirety online following today's session. Next slide, please. So City of Yes for Economic Opportunity, it's scheduled to enter public review later this year. It's the second in sequence of citywide reforms to our zoning resolution. The other 2 proposals, just to note briefly, City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality, it's currently in public review. So this initiative, it's designed to help New York City meet its ambitious goals of reducing its carbon emissions by 80% by 2050 by updating our city zoning to make it easier to green our buildings, our streets, and our city. and City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, scheduled to enter into public review next spring, is an inclusive citywide approach to our city's housing crisis that aims to expand and diversify our city's housing supply and ensure that every neighborhood does its part to help meet housing needs and provide equitable access to housing for all New Yorkers. You can learn more about either one of these proposals at nyc.gov/City of Yes. Next slide, please. But on City of Yes for Economic Opportunity, we've been on a listening tour for more than a year now, asking small business owners, chambers of commerce, business improvement districts, industrial service providers, and other stakeholders across our city ways that our zoning might be getting in the way of either establishing or expanding small businesses. We've met with well over 100 groups. We've now had 5 as of this evening, public information sessions, and we've heard from countless New Yorkers about the challenges that you face. And so this proposal has been an iterative process shaped by what we've heard. Next slide, please. And a lot of what we've heard is that, let's face it, New York City can be a pretty challenging place to run a business, and dealing with city regulations are oftentimes frustrating or slow or confusing or just simply illogical. And all of this red tape, it can make investing in our businesses hard. And that in turn contributes to a city that's less vibrant, having fewer people able to start their business, having one more vacant storefront, having one more business have to leave their neighborhood or the city overall just to expand. Next slide, please. And we also know that the pandemic made things even harder for many businesses, but in these difficult times, we also saw some silver linings and resilience in the ways that our commercial areas have adapted to crisis. Now, there are 3 key effects we see coming out of the pandemic that are particularly relevant to bear in mind and inform our thinking for this initiative. The first is storefront vacancy. And we know that even before the pandemic, high storefront vacancy affected the health of many of our city's retail corridors, and new vacancies arose during the pandemic. And while some commercial corridors have bounced back, others have not. And so our ability to ensure that streets can be repopulated with new and expanding businesses remains one of our chief concerns. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Staying on this slide. Second, remote work. It presents challenges to our city's office districts that are also suffering from high vacancy and a period of reinvention. But this is an opportunity to reimagine our central business districts, as well as neighborhoods across the city, and make sure that we're supporting businesses closer to home as people spend more time in their home neighborhoods. And third, there's a number of new industries like life sciences that are emerging in ways that can help to accelerate our city's recovery and create good jobs across all 5 boroughs. Next slide, please. So how does zoning fit into all of this? Zoning is how we as the city set the stage for how businesses can physically locate in the city. It's how our government sets rules for what kinds of businesses can open, where they can locate, how big they can be, and a number of other parameters that dictate or constrain business location and operation. Next slide, please. And oftentimes what we've heard in our outreach and in meetings like this is that our rules governing businesses, many of them more than 60 years old now, they're just holding our businesses back, either by restricting businesses from outright locating or regulating how they do business in some sort of old or complicated rule that's just not clear in ways that cost businesses time and money. Our overarching vision for this work is to make sure that our zoning works for our economy and not against it. And so we want to make sure as a result of this initiative that our zoning is more simple, it's more adaptable, and it's more modern. Next slide, please. Because ultimately, we think that a city that says yes to businesses thriving is one that's better for all of us. We believe that easier pathways for businesses means more kinds of businesses and fewer vacant storefronts. We believe it means more diversity of businesses in our neighborhoods, more fun, more family-friendly activities, more jobs in a city that's just a little bit easier to make it in. Next slide, please. So how do we achieve this? We have 4 goals for this work. The first, we want to expand options for businesses to locate closer to their customers. The main way we propose to do this is by removing zoning restrictions on particular businesses, allowing a diverse range of businesses to locate in storefront spaces along our commercial corridors. These changes to zoning will make it so that more businesses can open and combat storefront vacancy by making it easier to fill empty space. Second, we want to support business and industry growth in ways that can help to catalyze our city's economic recovery and create good jobs. We will do this by removing impediments or reducing ambiguity in our zoning for specific industries, which can help these emerging businesses to thrive in our city. Third, we want to foster more vibrant neighborhoods by increasing the access that New Yorkers have to local goods and services, and by making sure that we can activate our commercial streets. And fourth, and finally, we want to give businesses more certainty and predictability on where they can locate and what they can do with their space. We aim to do this by clarifying and modernizing the way that our zoning regulates use, or the kinds of activities that are allowed to occur in a particular area. Next slide, please. I'll now go through each of 19 proposals that we have to change our zoning to meet these goals. Next slide, please. Our first goal, it's about expanding options for businesses to locate. So through our engagement and outreach, we've learned of a number of ways in which our current zoning, it's inhibiting business location or expansion in places that make sense. So this goal, it's all about bringing new location options to help businesses grow near their customers. Next slide, please. Proposal 1, it's about removing zoning restrictions on ground floors. So in some of the city's higher density commercial areas, such as Midtown South, as well as commercial corridors like 125th Street in Harlem or Main Street in Flushing, you have some kinds of businesses that are allowed to locate above the ground floor, but these businesses are prohibited from locating in a storefront space on the ground floor. These businesses include ones like art studios, instructional facilities, and clothing rental shops. We think these restrictions make no sense, and so we want to open up allowing these kinds of businesses to locate on the ground floor as well. Next slide, please. Proposal 2, it's about allowing consistent uses in similar zoning districts. So today, we have neighborhood retail corridors that are typically zoned either C1 or C2, and we have higher density or more centrally located business districts that are typically zoned C4, C5, or C6. Now, there are sometimes important distinctions between these districts. For example, C4 districts and C6 districts are at different heights in many places, but because our zoning is 60 years old, it leaves arbitrary distinctions sometimes on what kinds of businesses can locate in each district. And in many places of our city, you can see these districts located in very similar places along the same commercial corridor. And in fact, in many places in our city, you have one district on one side of the street and one district on the other side of the street. And so as a result, you might find that one side of the street allows for movie theaters, but on the other side of the street, they're not allowed. Or you might want to open up a bike sale shop, and you could do that today on either side of the street. But if you wanted to also rent your bicycles, you'd have to be located on one side of the street and not the other. So we want to simplify these distinctions, treat similar zoning districts in a similar way. And so what we're proposing here is to allow for a consistent mix of businesses across our C1 and our C2 districts, and allow for a consistent mix of businesses across our C4, C5, and C6 districts. This would remove the arbitrary barriers along corridors that are getting in the way of businesses being able to locate in a particular area. Next slide, please. Proposal 3 would allow for small-scale clean manufacturing and production spaces to flourish across our city by allowing them for the first time in many of our city's commercial districts. So today, our zoning allows for limited kinds of manufacturing to occur in places like Midtown, but it restricts most kinds of manufacturing activities to the city's industrial areas. Now, there are many kinds of clean production, things like food and beverage making, apparel design, jewelry making, 3D printing, and the like, that are perfectly appropriate to locate in commercial areas. And in fact, these businesses may benefit from being able to locate closer to their customers in a storefront space. Now, these businesses would be subject to environmental standards to ensure that they're not negatively impacting their neighbors. But we think this proposal would make a big difference in allowing for New Yorkers to make things and sell things in the same space. Next slide, please. Proposal 4 would expand options for commercial uses above the ground floor. So today, our zoning allows for many buildings to have a mix of residential and commercial uses, but our zoning sometimes restricts businesses from using space above the ground floor. This limits options for buildings to be built that are new, that contain both residences and businesses, but it also limits options for buildings to adapt over time. For example, in some commercial areas, you can have a second story that includes a medical office. But if that medical office were to go away, there's no way in our zoning to allow for another kind of office to fill that vacant space. So in these circumstances, we want to allow for second story commercial spaces. In the city's higher density locations, places like Midtown, Lower Manhattan, Long Island City, and downtown Brooklyn, you have commercial uses that can often be above the first and second floor, but you can't allow for businesses and residences at the same level. And you also cannot allow for commercial activities to locate above residences. Now, we want to allow for renovations or new construction of mixed-use buildings where it makes sense. And this is especially useful for something like a rooftop restaurant or a large-scale renovation where different sections of a building with different elevator banks may serve different purposes in the future. Now, to ensure safety and sound mitigation, we would require complete separation between the commercial and residential parts of the building, including separate entrances and separate elevators. Next slide, please. For Proposal 5, we want to create new loft-style zoning tools for job districts in the future. So today, low-density options, physical design rules, and parking can make it impossible to build loft-like buildings, even in areas where they already exist. This proposal would create a range of new job-intensive zoning districts at a range of densities and heights that could expand our city's zoning toolkit for future rezonings. Next slide, please. On to our second goal. We want to create and support growing industries by unlocking new space and encouraging new business models. So this goal, it's all about addressing ways that our zoning might be getting in the way or causing confusion for a particular emerging industry that can help our city to accelerate its economic recovery. Next slide, please. Proposal 6, life sciences. It's a growing industry in our city today, and so we want to make sure that our zoning is clear on what kinds of life sciences activities are allowed in commercial laboratories so that innovative companies can grow without our zoning being a barrier to that growth. Over the last few years, there's been some confusion as to what kinds of labs can locate in commercial areas versus being more appropriate to locate in industrial areas. So our proposal is to make it clear that if you're a life sciences business, unless you have the potential for environmental hazards, that you are appropriate to locate in an office setting in a commercial area. And we think that this provides more clarity and confidence than exists today. Next slide, please. Proposal 7. It's about situations in which there's a new or growing business that wants to construct a new building, and they often run into small zoning issues that limit the shape of their building. For example, film studios have struggled with zoning regulations like the minimum height the building hits before it has to start moving back towards the center. We want to address these kinds of zoning barriers. So we're creating a discretionary pathway in our zoning, or if a business can locate in a district already, but it can't build the shape or the form of the building they want, they could appeal to the City Planning Commission for relief from just that kind of a zoning restriction. Next slide, please. Proposal 8. Our zoning today is confusing and outdated in the way that it regulates nightlife in ways that are harmful to communities and businesses that are trying to understand the rules. For instance, a restaurant or a bar is allowed to have live music today in any commercial district, but that same restaurant might be prohibited from having the band charge a cover or advertise as showtime. And it might be prohibited from hosting other forms of live entertainment like comedy or open mic nights. Furthermore, it is still illegal in certain areas under zoning to dance in a bar, club, or restaurant, even though the city repealed the cabaret law several years ago. Now, New York City has a long history of discriminatory practices regulating dancing and nightlife, and our zoning is a relic of this discriminatory past and how it continues to restrict music, comedy, and dancing in many locations. Our proposal aims to clarify when a bar or a restaurant can host dancing or other forms of live scheduled entertainment by regulating these venues based on size, not by activity. That means that live comedy, DJs, dancing, and ticketed events would now be treated the same under zoning, but venues would have their occupancy limited to 200 people, or roughly the size of a regular storefront, when locating in a neighborhood commercial street or commercial overlay. Venues over 200 people would be limited to places like our central business districts in Midtown or the city's industrial areas. Now, we know that sometimes bars and restaurants can create concerns in the community. And so we want you to know that we've been working very closely with our colleagues at the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and other city agencies to protect quality of life for New Yorkers. Now, DOB and the FDNY, their rules around occupancy and safety, DEP regulations around amplified sound, and community board stipulations during the liquor licensing process all help to ensure that venues are being good neighbors. And programs like Mend NYC can step in and mediate any lingering issues that may arise between nightlife venues and community members. It's long past due to repeal the cabaret law, and this proposal finishes the job while keeping nightlife venues small in neighborhood settings. Next slide, please. Proposal 9. The way that our zoning regulates amusements just hasn't kept up with things like virtual skydiving, children's arcades, virtual reality, trampoline parks, and it basically restricts most kinds of amusements to Coney Island and the city's industrial areas. Yet you can look to our neighbors to the north in Westchester or across the Hudson River in New Jersey, and you'll find all kinds of fun, family-friendly activities that are allowed. So what we're proposing here is to simplify and modernize the way that our zoning thinks about these kinds of businesses, allowing them indoors and at a small scale in neighborhood commercial corridors, and at a larger scale and more centrally located in higher density areas like Midtown. Next slide, please. And we're aware of the State Gaming Commission's work on casinos, and we're continuing to work with City Hall and the City Council to understand whether there are zoning implications that would need to be addressed to enable this process. More to come on this at a later date. Next slide, please. Lastly, under our second goal, there's a particularly confusing part of our zoning. It's called enclosure, and it sometimes makes it hard to understand when a business can have an outdoor component or be allowed to operate indoors. So for instance, if you're a florist or a plant shop, you can go to DOT and get a stoop license, but it's unclear how much of your business can be in the outdoors part of your zoning lot. And while our zoning is clear that you can have outdoor urban agriculture or a greenhouse in a commercial area, it's come to our attention that there's some ambiguity in our zoning as to whether you could do what you would do in a greenhouse, but have it be in a completely enclosed building in some commercial areas. So we want to clarify all this and say, if you're a florist or a plant shop, yes, of course, you can have part of your business outdoors. And if you want to have indoor agriculture, such as growing hydroponic tomatoes, well, that's a permitted use in commercial areas as well. And if someone obtains a license from the state, growing cannabis is also a permitted use here. Next slide, please. Proposal 3. Each of the proposals under our third goal, fostering vibrant neighborhoods, touches on ways we want to enable our zoning to increase the access that New Yorkers have to local goods and services. Next slide, please. Outside of our commercial corridors, we have thousands of storefronts that dot our city's residential districts, and these businesses provide vital access to local goods and services for folks who might live further away from the nearest commercial corridor. But many of these storefronts, they predate our 1961 zoning, and so they're technically not allowed under current zoning. So what this means is if the storefront were to go vacant for more than 2 years, in many residential areas, there's no way in our zoning to reoccupy this form of commercial space, and so it would have to remain vacant. We think this is a very clear example of our zoning contributing to storefront vacancy. So we want to remove that 2-year time clock and allow vacant storefronts to become reoccupied. Next slide, please. Proposal 13. But there are parts of our city where we don't have commercial zoning, and so there's no way other than a full neighborhood-wide rezoning to allow for a new storefront space where a bodega or other kind of neighborhood serving business could locate. So this proposal would create a discretionary pathway that would allow for new corner stores, but only in certain circumstances. So the commercial space would have to be under 2,500 square feet. It would have to be located close to an intersection. So this would provide access to goods and services, but it would not turn that residential street into a commercial corridor. And the process to allow for these new storefront spaces would be discretionary, meaning it's subject to both community board review and city planning commission approval. So we think this proposal strikes a reasonable balance of giving more New Yorkers the ability to walk to pick up basic necessities while giving the community a say in where these storefronts can go. Next slide, please. Proposal 14. We allow for a wide range of home businesses in our zoning today, but there are specific types of businesses that are not allowed to locate in the home. For example, today you could be a lawyer or a music teacher and regularly have clients visit you in your home, but you could not be a barber or an interior designer. So we want to remove these inequities and update our regulations for home businesses to allow a wider range of home-based businesses while keeping in place rules that we have around being a good neighbor. So not having exterior signage, abiding by noise and environmental rules, and not selling anything you didn't produce on site. Next slide, please. Proposal 15. We have special streetscape rules that have been put in place in many special districts and rezonings the city's done over the last 60 years. But vast parts of our city, especially outside of Manhattan, have no rules whatsoever to prevent new kinds of buildings that don't contribute to economic vibrancy or are simply unpleasant for passing residents. This approach has created a patchwork of differing sets of rules that are too often confusing, inconsistent, and difficult for businesses to understand. We want to establish a consistent and easy to understand baseline set of rules for commercial ground floor design, one that's more responsive in areas with greater pedestrian activity, and one that's more relaxed in our city's auto-oriented commercial corridors. Next slide, please. Proposal 16. Our zoning today has outdated and difficult to enforce rules around small-scale wholesale and storage businesses, and it makes it hard to facilitate the kind of neighborhood-based hubs we might want to see in the future for safe and sustainable deliveries. Now, this proposal would clarify that wholesale and storage businesses are permitted in commercial areas, but only at a limited scale. And we would also ensure that these spaces contribute to the vibrancy of their surrounding businesses through rules we put in place as part of our streetscape proposal on the last slide that would require transparent windows in areas with greater pedestrian activity. Next slide, please. Proposal 17. So today, auto installation, service, and repair businesses, they're mostly restricted to our city's industrial areas, but current zoning creates exceptions for certain parts of a car, such as glass, seat covers, and tires. But in practice, this means that some businesses end up conducting heavy industrial level activity on a neighborhood commercial street. And this could lead to environmental concerns as well as business activity that spills out onto the sidewalk and the street, which can create unsafe conditions for people who are walking by. Now, this proposal, it would consolidate the range of auto servicing uses and allow for new auto servicing uses in our commercial districts to receive a BSA special permit. This would reduce heavy industry activity on neighborhood commercial streets, but also encourage site plans that would reduce conflicts with pedestrians and spill over onto neighboring lots. Next slide, please. So our fourth and our final goal, it's about modernizing and clarifying the rules we have in zoning around use, or the kinds of activities that our zoning allows in a particular location. Next slide, please. So this part of the proposal, it's all about clarity and modernizing the terms we have in our zoning for classifying businesses. In most cases, our use rules, they're more than 60 years old. They've not been updated to reflect changes in business practices or how our city's economy has evolved over time. And so these regulations, they're full of antiquated and confusing terms that make it harder for small businesses to know what they can do and where they can locate. For example, our zoning is very clear and defines clearly where a telegraph office is allowed to locate, but it's a lot less clear on where cell phone repair shops can go. We're doing three things here to make it easier for small businesses, city agencies like the Department of Buildings, and the general public to better able to understand this particularly unclear and outdated part of our zoning resolution. We are first reorganizing categories of uses we have in zoning, we call them use groups, into something more coherent based on similar business sector and building type, such as retail and services, offices, places of assembly, and manufacturing. At the same time, we're modernizing the terms or definitions that we have for retail, services, and manufacturing uses, so they better align with the city's current economy. Third, we have some special districts where use terms like typewriter repair are especially antiquated. So we want to update these terms as well as all of our sets of rules so they fit together in ways that are easier for businesses to understand. Next slide, please. So our last proposal is about modernizing our city's loading rules for existing buildings. So today, if a building tenant were to change from, say, offices to one of the clean, small manufacturing spaces I mentioned earlier in the proposal, they are not required in our zoning today to change the amount of parking they have to provide, but they may trigger a rule for additional loading docks. Now, this could require the prospective tenant to have to cut an additional loading dock or two into the side of the building just to be able to occupy a space, regardless of how much loading that tenant might need or might want. Now, adding additional unnecessary loading docks, it might be too expensive or just simply not feasible for the building they're looking to occupy. And this could result in a business that wants to occupy a space having to look elsewhere. So that means more vacancy or underused space. We want to enable adaptive reuse for existing buildings by not requiring or mandating additional loading for a change of use in an existing building. New buildings, however, still have to add a number of loading docks appropriate to the proposed mix of uses in that building. Next slide, please. I'll close this evening by sharing a roadmap for the process to come. So after more than a year now of getting in front of as many audiences and as we can, presenting these ideas on solutions to what we've heard are issues in our zoning that businesses are facing today, and soliciting your feedback and your questions on these proposals, we're now in the process of drafting our zoning text in preparation for the start of the formal public review process. So then later this fall, we'll be in front of every community board in the city, and this process will culminate in a city council vote sometime next year. So with that, thank you for your time this evening, and we'd welcome any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Matt. Appreciate your detailed presentation and leaving enough time for us to have some great dialogue here. So as I mentioned, you can continue to put questions into the Q&A chat at the bottom of your screen. I already see some in there. And as well, the raise hand feature is now available. So you will be able to ask questions live. We will go back and forth between the Q&A box and raised hands. And then we'll continue that until about 8:30. And then we can wrap up around then. Of course, if there's still more questions, you are able to email us at economic opportunity. Sorry, I don't have the actual DL in front of me. Economic opportunity at planning.nyc.gov. And if you are on the phone, if you are dialing in, please press *9 to be able to ask your question. So with that, we will start with the Q&A box. I wanted to start with, since we can't tell in the format how many people are tuning in, I just wanted to make sure that you were able to see that at the bottom of your screen. There are about 71 people signed in at the moment, and I can keep checking. I just want to make sure. Yes, we have 72 people checked in at the moment. And this is the 5th info session of this proposal available to the full public. In addition, we have had hundreds of people attend these presentations, and we've had hundreds of presentations to community groups and organizations. Let me just close. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to move on to another question. This is from the QA box as well, from Jeremy. This probably can't be answered tonight. I am representing Community Board 7 in Brooklyn, and we put a lot of time and energy into the thought process of comments on City of Yes for carbon neutrality. I would like to know how these ideas and concerns are incorporated into the product that passed yesterday. The carbon neutrality vote at the City Planning Commission happened yesterday, and it is now moving forward to the City Council. If it wasn't, so the question is, if it wasn't, how should our board think about the time and energy for consideration for this one? This is a great question, and I'm happy to answer it tonight. By law and by practice, comments submitted by the community board is read and contemplated as part of the City Planning Commission's wider consideration of a given project. Community boards submitted comments as well as all the comments heard at the public hearings and things that we've heard through written testimony from our constituents in New York City are part of the final record in the City Planning Report, where you can see where the CPC made amendments to the responses to comments, or where it didn't, and how and why it was contemplated, specifically issues raised. So it's all within the City Planning Report. Jeremy, if you want to have any more information or find that, we can certainly send that to you. If you want to send an email to the economic opportunity at planning.nyc.gov, I can connect you to the right people for the carbon neutrality. Okay. So we'll move on to the next Q&A question in the question box. Matt, so can you share a map where existing zoning restrictions that apply to City of Yes economic opportunity and how the map would change if the initiative is passed?
Yeah, sure. So there won't be a single map per se, because the applicability for each of the proposals that I went through tonight is different for each zoning district. But as part of the information that we're providing as for individual community board materials, we're going to zoom in on each of those 59 community board or community districts and provide more details on how each of these proposals would be different in their applicability for each localities. So you can also explore today the commercial districts in your area by visiting our tools online at Zola. So that's zola.planning.nyc.gov.
Hi, thank you so much. So I'm going to move to one more question in the QA box, and then I will go to a couple live ones and keep rotating back and forth. So this question is about variances. Will variances allow spaces to be permitted within the zoning district are close? For example, you mentioned C1 and C2. Can you talk about using a variance to overcome some zoning issues?
Sure. So I think if I understand your question correctly, some of the proposed changes can be handled through existing processes. But many of these processes today, they can take months or even years, and they might require the use of environmental consultants or land use attorneys or other professionals in order to do this. So the complexity of these rules, it often makes it more difficult and costly for businesses, particularly small businesses, to find space that meets their needs. So one of our overarching goals for this initiative is to remove the unnecessary or outdated zoning restrictions placed on our small businesses so that they can have more space to easily grow and locate in every neighborhood across our city. And providing this more clarity, it reduces the barriers to entry for small businesses. It reduces the time and the cost of starting a new business. And so we think that removing these kinds of zoning barriers is really important to economic opportunity and equity in our city.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. So let's go to a raised hand. Suin. Thank you for joining us again tonight. You'll be promoted in a moment.
Hi. So I have a few questions again. First of all, in terms of the conversion of residential space to corner stores, you're saying that you expect that to be extremely rare. How do you know that? And have you calculated the amount of residential space that would be lost if all of the spaces that are eligible to convert under this new rule do convert to commercial space? Second, in terms of the small, clean manufacturing thing, I think I probably asked about this before. How are you going to define small? Likewise, how are you going to define clean? Are you going to release an itemized list of the types of manufacturing that will be eligible under this new rule change? With regards to nightclubs, this is something that people at my community board talked about a lot. I'm at Community Board 9 in Brooklyn. I think the 200-person cutoff for a large venue, that's huge for a neighborhood like ours. Our experience in the past with nightclubs has been that they were shut down due to shootings, violent incidents, a raft of noise complaints. And these were for venues that could not accommodate even 100 people, let alone 200. There have been a lot of reports about some of these larger venues like Avant Gardner in Brooklyn, where there have been drug overdose deaths and so on. And I'm just wondering, how does the policy of potentially expanding these types of businesses to all parts of the city fit in with, the mayor's commitment to public safety and the Brooklyn Borough President's commitment to public health as part of his land use plan? What what else? Okay, I guess that's, and also with respect to the home-based businesses, I understand that happens a lot in New York City. I've been to hairdressers that had their operations in their apartments before, and it's fine. But as a matter of policy, I guess they do have to have health inspections and things like that. So how is that going to take place when that's in somebody's apartment? Is that really going to be feasible, that these guys are going to go around the city from building to building, knocking on doors and checking out people's apartments? I'm just wondering if that's, been discussed. I guess that's it for now. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Suan, for all 4 categories. I was taking notes, and I think I got each, but please feel free to follow up with us over email, economicopportunity@planning.nyc.gov, if I'm not answering your questions. Also, I'm sure I'll be seeing you later this fall, or one of my colleagues will out in CB9 in Brooklyn. So starting on corner stores, and why we're thinking that this is going to be occurring in rare situations, it's because it's a process to help plan for new spaces. So I noted in my proposal, but I'll emphasize here that it is discretionary. So these spaces, they have to go through environmental review. They also have to go through community board review. But we see this being an opportunity, particularly when you might have, as you do in many parts of the city today, you have 2 corners of an intersection that allow for commercial uses, but maybe one of the other corners does not. And so let's say the corner that doesn't, the business, the person who owns that corner, they want to remake their building and make sure that they can have a neighborhood serving business locate there. Today, there's no path for them whatsoever. The city does not pursue a 1 lot sized neighborhood rezoning overlay. And so they would need to go through a process that does not exist. But as part of the work we did under the flood coastal resiliency flood tax several years back, we created a pathway that allows for, if you are along our city's coastline, to have neighborhood serving businesses in residential areas. And we want to take that idea and give folks a path. That doesn't mean that you're going to see a business appear on every corner. In fact, quite the opposite. We admittedly recognize that this is still a very high bar for folks to reach, but we want to create a possibility of a path through a public process with the community boards where one does not exist today. So that's on corner stores. On small clean manufacturing, I can provide you, I do remember you actually asking this back in July, so I can provide a little bit more detail. And once we have our draft zoning text that we're able to release in the formal public review process, you'll get even more detail. But what we're looking for here is to create a list that's pretty easy for folks like yourself, as well as business owners and the Department of Buildings, to understand exactly what kinds of businesses qualify as being potentially eligible for clean manufacturing, and then to make sure that they have some sort of a process to go through to say, yes, I'm not creating any kind of air quality or noise impact that could potentially harm neighbors, whether those neighbors are other businesses or residences. So we're still going through that part of the process. Admittedly, we're still finishing up our environmental review. But as far as the list, I can say yes, affirmatively, there is planning to be a defined list of which businesses are considered small scale clean manufacturing and therefore appropriate to locate in commercial areas. Around nightlife, we want to make sure that what we're doing here is to take our existing rules, which do already in parts of our city define 200-person threshold for live scheduled entertainment. You can have live music today. You could have a band or with amplified loud sound in any commercial district today at up to 200 people capacity. So we're taking that idea and we're allowing other forms of live scheduled entertainment like comedy, like dancing, according to the existing rules that we have for live music. So we're consolidating the different forms of live scheduled entertainment. And then we're also working with our colleagues, not just at the Office of Nightlife, but the NYPD, the DEP, and other agencies to ensure that when or if an issue were to arise, and we do assume that most businesses are good actors, they want to stay in the community in order to get a liquor license, they go forward in the community. So we want to make sure that we assume most businesses are being good actors, but if one is not, we have processes put in place to mediate any sort of behavior that is not being a good neighbor for area residents, as well as other businesses. So the main program I want to highlight tonight is Mend NYC, and that is a mediation program where anyone who has a concern about a particular business, whether that's a noise concern, a safety concern, or something else, can work with both the local police precinct as well as the business themselves in addressing that concern directly. And so the Mayor's Office of Nightlife has seen great success since that program's been around in about a year and a half, and it's an available resource to yourself or to anyone else who might need it. And then lastly, on home occupations, you mentioned hairdressers are fine. And I want to highlight that because, in fact, that's one of the business types that our zoning explicitly prohibits today. And this is all kinds of activity that we saw even before the pandemic, but especially during the pandemic. More New Yorkers are working from home. And for some kinds of businesses that want to operate or get their start in the home, they're allowed. But some, like people who are cutting hair, are not allowed. So we want to remove that inequity and allow people who are cutting hair to be allowed to operate in the home. Like, as you said, it's fine to do. It makes sense. Many New Yorkers do it today, and you or they may not even know that it's technically not allowed. But what we do want to make sure is that we're protecting the neighbors of the person doing that business activity in their home. So that's why the Department of Buildings, which enforces our zoning, interprets and enforces our zoning generally, they're standing by on things related to home businesses that may not be good neighbors. So that could be everything from an odor to a sound to maybe you're getting a bunch of packages and something's up. So we want to make clear that for home businesses, they're still secondary or accessory to the dwelling unit, and that they're not doing anything that in zoning terms we consider to be an objectionable effect. Something that would be a negative impact on their surrounding neighbors, other apartments, other residents. And then lastly, I do know that if you're in a co-op building or a condo, sometimes there are rules against home occupations that are more broad than what zoning allows. So make sure to double check those as well. So I think I got all 4 parts of your questions, and I went into great depth, but if there are more questions, we're happy to receive them. Economic Opportunity, planning.nyc.gov.
Thank you, Matt. Covered a lot there. Can we now promote Alicia Boyd? Hello? Alicia, can you hear us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. I just have a couple of questions. I'm going to piggyback off of some of the things that Suki Chung had sat there and stated. She's from the same community board. I'm not a community board member, I'm a resident of the community. One of the things I find really disturbing about the proposal to start to merge the light manufacturing with commercial is the fact that you haven't even decided what the clean commercial is. You've been working already for over a year on this proposal. This is a major shift and change in changing the manufacturing, light manufacturing, to the commercial designation, and yet you still don't have the list where you can tell the community these are the types of businesses. Because when I went onto your website and I saw the light manufacturing, there's a lot of things that would be disturbing to me that should not be in a residential building, but you're now saying that you haven't got that list yet. So you're pushing forward a process of changing drastically. That's a very drastic change of changing a light manufacturing to a commercial designation and then allowing the commercial designation to be inside of a residential building. And yet you have not come up with the list. So I think that's a little bit disingenuous on you guys' part for not having that list and then continuing to talk about, oh, we want to do this, we want to do, but we don't have a list. We don't know what forms of businesses we're actually talking about. I also wanted to just mention the fact that, you know, in your current rules and regulations, you talk about the fact that these types of small manufacturing places would do a lot of things. And one would normally generate a great deal of traffic, both walking and freight traffic. This is from the use group 17, which is the light manufacturing group right now, because you haven't given us anything else. And yet you're proposing this stuff all over the city, and there's no consideration about the traffic and how many people will be coming into a building now. So for example, you have a very small building, you have a residential building, you have 6-story, you have a 5-story building. And here comes, you know, a light manufacturing, let's say somebody's gonna grow weed and now you have all of these people coming into that building and buying, or you could put a deli there, or, you know, some business that was at one time on the ground floor can now be on this floor. And you're going to get all this traffic, and nobody's talking about what kind of environmental impact that's going to have on the community when you start to merge the manufacturing, light manufacturing, with residential. I also want to point out the fact that one of the main reasons why you have the separation between the manufacturing and the commercial is to, and I'll quote what it states in the law currently, to protect residences by separating them from manufacturing activities. That is your main goal. You're merging that goal now. You're basically saying, and I don't agree that there should be hairdressers inside of a building. Hairdressers use all kinds of products that may not necessarily be maybe harmful to the residents. They use dyes, they use, you know, all kinds of lye. They do, and these are very odorous things. They come through the walls, they're in the hallway, people can smell them. And that's why you have the restriction. You have it down on a ground floor, not inside a residential building, but now you're going to put it inside of a residential building. And then the third thing you're talking about is the environmental. Oh, you know, we're concerned about the environmental impact. But that's what you're supposed to be doing now. From what I've been told, you have already stated that there will be no negative environmental impact on the proposed changes that you're planning on doing. So I'm a little confused about how you are going to address an environmental impact if you're already saying that there will be no impact. So you need to qualify that for me. And then you also talk about the residential, right? Putting commercial into residential on residential blocks. Your example is, oh, across the street, there's 2 commercials, and across the other street, oh, we want more commercial. But what about the blocks that don't have any commercial? That means a commercial business can open up on that residential block. To say, oh, we don't think that people are going to abide by the rule, even though we're making the rule, is also disingenuous. Clearly, if you have a long strip, and I know I have a long strip on in my neighborhood, it's called Bedford Avenue. Nice, beautiful long strip in my neighborhood. No commercial, nice and quiet. We could walk a block over to Flatbush and get all the commercial that we want. It's a nice space. Would somebody be willing to put a commercial spot on that block? Sure, why not? Because there's no other commercial. That would actually incentivize the property owners to put a commercial, because there is no commercial there. So of course, it's going to be an incentive to go into a community and say, hey, look at this block, no commercial on here. I could be the first one. I could be the one with the liquor, store. I could be the one with the cleaners store here in the community. But then what happens to that community? What happens to that nice, quiet block? What happens to, walking down this nice tree-lined, quiet block that now starts to have commercial on every corner because you've allowed it? Oh yeah, right, I forgot. It's going to sit there and you're going to ask DCP for permission. And we know how that works. When you talk about the community boards are only advisory in those situations. You know that. You're not asking the community whether they approve it or not. You're just saying, what's your opinion? And what we've known is that you take the community board's opinion, put it in the garbage, and then you sit there and do what you want to do anyway. And the text amendments, this is an example of those text amendments. How many people have come to you and told you, how many communities have come and told you that they don't want the dancing till 4 o'clock in the morning in their neighborhoods? They don't want it at small establishments because it causes a lot of noise. But you come back and still say, oh, but you can arbitrate. So you're already setting us up for failure, where we now have to sit there and engage in arbitration because we have businesses now sitting on the corners with people dancing till 4 o'clock in the morning, alcohol, drinking, noise, drugs, drunkenness, and now we have to now arbitrate that situation. So you already know that there's going to be a situation. Now we have to now go and do one more step and arbitrate. And as far as, like I said, the community having a say, we know that constantly communities are asked to weigh in, but they're only advisory. And at the end of the day, the Department of City Planning always approves these projects. The Department of City Planning has a 99% success rate. Anybody who puts an application in front of the Department of City Planning and the City Planning certifies that application, there's a 99% success rate that they will get that application approved. So you coming and saying, oh, well, the community can weigh in is just another set of smoke screens. So again, I'm very concerned about, and people have stated it constantly, we're concerned about breaking the rules that have been instituted for the safety and comfort of the residents. What I'm seeing here is it's all about business, as if the residents in the community don't mean anything. It's the only thing that's important is residents, is the commercial, is what the commercial people want. It's not what the residents in their communities want. And I hope that moving forward, one, that you would get these classified, and actually make some changes to the rules, because you've been getting feedback and you have not changed anything that I could see in this second presentation from the first presentation. So I'm finished.
Okay.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, thank you for your perspective, your questions, your comments. Again, I've been taking notes. I'll try and cover as many topics as I can, but I may admittedly miss some of the things that you said, but I'll try my best. So first on adaptations and wanting to ensure as update our regulations around light manufacturing, or what we are calling clean manufacturing. So our zoning looks a lot different, and our businesses look a lot different, and technology looks a lot different than it did in 1961. So despite changes in technology and the way that businesses have operated, things that might have been unsafe in 1961 can now safely operate in a mixed use environment today. We recognize this in the Department of City Planning actually back in the 90s, when we created mixed use zoning, or MX zoning, which pairs light industrial with residential. And so that's what we're using on the basis, this 30-year-old policy, and which has been in practice in places throughout our city, where we do see the coexistence of light industrial and residential and commercial uses. And so these have been permitted for decades. We think by and large that they're able to operate safely. And as the basis for what we're proposing here, we are using those regulations. So we've come a long way since the 60s in terms of how light manufacturing can be and does safely coexist with residential contexts. But I also want to note that we do have light industrial that was permitted back in the 60s and still is permitted today in our commercial districts. So these are our bakeries, these are dressmakers, and many other kinds of light manufacturing uses that are not use group 17 that appear in many of our other use groups. So that's also part of this as well, is consolidating those. Now, I wanted to also touch on environmental, because you talked about the EIS or the EAS process. So to unpack that a little bit for folks who are listening in who may not know what these acronyms are, an EAS, it's an environmental study. It considers 19 different kinds of technical areas to determine whether this land use action or any land use action might have a significant adverse environmental impact. So that's the trigger for preparing an EIS, or a higher level of analysis. Now, we don't believe, and we're working hard to ensure that the proposal doesn't have the potential for significant impacts, but if anything in our analysis were to come up with the potential for significant environmental impacts, we have one or two choices. We either figure out a way in our zoning to create a mitigation for ensuring that there would be no significant impact, or that part of the proposal drops out entirely. And so what you're seeing today, we're still going through our process. We believe it will be an EAS, and we will continue to update you and other members of the community as we go through this process. Now, I wanted to last touch on corner stores again and emphasize that the process is discretionary and does include community board input. And the way we're structuring this, the City Planning Commission has the authority to say yes or no, but take seriously the input of community board members and considering whether that small space is appropriate for a residential area. And so it is likely the case that if a business were to come forward through this discretionary process and the community board were to overwhelmingly say they're not appropriate, then it might be harder for them to be able to become part of the community and part of that space. So I want to emphasize that this is a discretionary process. We are not allowing for new commercial as of right. And we're ensuring that this process is useful in certain instances, but is not going to transform areas that are not meant for that kind of an activity.
Thank you so much, Matt, for those answers. And I just wanted to reiterate what I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, of that during the public review process, when we refer the actual text amendment, every comment and whether that's a public testimony or if it's a written comment, are submitted to the CPC, to the City Planning Commission. And they are in the final, they're recorded and they're in the final report. And you can find their comments associated with each of the recommendations or testimony questions. So I just want to reiterate that through the referral process, that does happen. And as we are doing this hard work right now, trying to shape the proposal, everything here has been contemplated very well with the hundreds of groups that we have spoken to so far, and organizations. And in these info sessions, we have a complete running list of questions and want to make sure that we're answering them all. So please keep submitting them to economicopportunity@planning.nyc.gov. And we'll continue to have these info sessions to make sure that we have opportunities to hear responses to how the proposal is shaping. So I'm going to go back to the Q&A. So Matt, we're going to go, so this is number 6, I believe. So can zoning be updated, but permits or special permits remain to allow community boards to have input or address objections? One size does not fit all, and we would like to have the city say yes to CB input, not just expect communities to go along with an appropriate or development not in the character of neighborhood, not in the character of the neighborhood. An example of this is a community with several schools and a commercial corridor or a block that should not become hubs for vices such as gaming or cannabis shops. Can you take a second to address that?
Sure. Thank you for your question and for your underlying concern. We understand and I understand these concerns. So we're trying to find in this work an appropriate balance between them and the needs of businesses in the community. And so it's important to know that we understand that special permits, other discretionary processes, they're an important part of what we allow for as part of our zoning. We have underlying zoning things that are allowed as of right. And then we have a number of discretionary pathways for businesses where there is a reason to have make sure that before that business is allowed to go in to a particular place, that there's a larger consideration. Now, that's always a balance, because if we needed every single business to go through a special permit, well, I have to imagine that you would have a commercial corridor with 100% vacancy or pretty close to it. And it would be very hard for businesses of any size to be able to locate in a neighborhood. Now, of course, I'm sure that's not what you mean. That's not what we want. And we want to strike a balance between where we have a discretionary process and where we don't. Now, on cannabis, I want to specifically note that nothing in this proposal is about legalizing more cannabis shops. We're aware that illegal shops are an issue in many neighborhoods. And while these shops are illegal under state license, it's not city zoning or city laws. And so we've been learning from our colleague at Small Business Services about the work the city is doing with the state to ensure that penalties for unlicensed storefronts are addressed seriously, including evicting illegal businesses and legal action against landlords. So anyone wishing to report an illegal store should do so through 311 and cite cannabis retail sell complaint, specifically use those words, or visit the state's violation portal directly at ny.gov, Office of Cannabis Management.
Thank you, Matt. So I'm going to go to question, sorry. Okay, so question 8. This is actually just if you can explain the rule a little bit clearer. Non-conforming and non-complying use would allow a space to be reoccupied. Is that what we're saying here?
Yeah, that's right. So today, if a use or a business was in a space before our zoning rules prohibited it, it can remain in place. And that's true if the business was in place in the 1961 rezoning or in anything we've done since. So this is true of literally thousands of businesses across our city. They were businesses at the time of the 1961 zoning creation, and they've maintained constant or near constant use as a business since. The challenge is that if a business in many parts of our city closes for more than 2 years, that storefront loses the right to reopen. So we believe that if you were a business once, you should be able to become a business again, regardless of this arbitrary 2-year time clock. So we think this contributes to vacancy. We think it makes it harder for businesses, especially businesses who are closed for longer periods of time during COVID. So what we're proposing here, we want to remove that punitive time clock, but keep in all of the other rules we have around nonconformance. So you couldn't turn from, say, a bookstore into some sort of a cement smelting plant. So we want to make sure that you can only be a similar business and that you don't have that 2-year time clock for reactivation.
Thank you. So this next one is about proposal 13, which if I remember correctly, 13 is about the pathway to corner stores. So they're asking, I'm not positive, hopefully we can figure this out, but it says, can you please redo proposal 13? So I think we want to talk a little bit about just the process of how a little bit.
Sure. So we're absolutely open to your feedback on that proposal, on any of the proposals. And so we fully expect to hear your feedback. We're hearing a lot of it tonight, but also as we continue to enter the formal public review process, we're going to be going out to all 59 community boards, likely more than once in some instances. And so it's worth noting that proposal 13, which is about corner stores, is itself a proposal about more planning, which is to say, anyone wishing to use this proposal, they are committing to asking community boards, borough presidents, city planning commission for a special permission. So to make a land use application, environmental review, appearing before these bodies to make that case. So it's a really high bar for discretionary action. But we want a pathway to be possible where there is none today. So we recognize that's a high bar. And frankly, like some of the concerns we've heard from businesses who might use this is that's too high a bar. Now, we're trying to create a balance here based on the feedback we've heard tonight and in other places where we want there to be a path, but we believe that a high bar is warranted.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to do one more question from the Q&A, and then we'll go back to the live the hands that are raised. So how does the city determine the number of closed businesses since COVID? Did owners give up the buildings, or did rules restrict reopening? Many stores have not returned, so I'm just curious. This person, Deborah, is curious about how we analyze that.
Yeah, sure. So we, as the city, as well as just anyone in the general public, you have a number of different ways to look at for tracking business closures. So there are formal ways. There are things like tax records that the Department of Finance produces, and they have a formal vacancy count. And there are more informal things like Google Street View, or just as New Yorkers in our everyday experiences, walking down a street and seeing that a particular storefront is in fact still vacant, been vacant for a while. As it relates to zoning, there are things like changes of use of a storefront that can trigger filing with the Department of Buildings as well. So that's a bit about how we track this and how we look at storefront vacancy. And I'll also add that the Department of City Planning, even before the pandemic and then updated during the pandemic, we have 2 reports that we went into and we looked at a number of different commercial corridors, dozens of them across the city in different contexts and different boroughs, trying to understand some of the underlying trends and reasons why particular storefronts may be vacant. Some of our work actually does date back to some of our findings from that and understanding where zoning is being a direct contributor to vacancy.
Thank you, Matt. So we'll go back to the raised hands. If we can promote Maxine Barnes, and then the next person will be Emily Sharp.
Are you hearing me?
Hi, Maxine. Yeah, we can hear you now. Sorry.
Yes, homeowner 40 years in Prospect Lefferts Gardens and president emeritus of our Block Association. The City of Yes policies have been presented with the alleged concern and focus on economic opportunities. These 16 policies must not be by a broad brush stroke and must be specific to unique neighborhoods. Please know that community residents are concerned and say yes to the following questions and hope that you are concerned as well. 1, district needs of businesses providing fundamental and basic services and products of food, home maintenance, education, health, etc. Community residents are concerned and focused and say yes to small, predominantly Black businesses not being displaced, but given a lifeline. Our small, mostly Black businesses have been displaced by unaffordable rents. Our transit corridors where once small businesses thrived and provided essential services are now a sea of rent signs. Displaced small businesses that simply needed a little support from the city to liven up, brighten up, subsidize the unaffordable rents, and support the necessary services that they once provided. My community says yes to the redevelopment of these displaced businesses that were profitable, legal, and provided necessary services and products. In my community, we say yes to the hardware store of 60 years, now closed, displaced. The flower shop, 40 years, gone. The printing shop, 50 years, gone. The stationery shop, displaced. The shoe repair shop, displaced. Associated Supermarket, 50 years. We are now in the food desert. Just a few examples of the brick and mortar small businesses that serve basic and fundamental district needs and now are displaced in my community. The community says yes to the rule of law. Do you agree to stopping the proliferation of bars and liquor dispensaries on our corridors and adjacent to resident homes in Black communities? We don't want bars, and the last thing we need is dancing bars that would inevitably generate loud, unbearable noise, double parking, trashing in our already too dense community. And as Ms. Boyce said, you're still saying that this is on the table. You haven't removed it. Stopping laundromats from serving up liquor, absent oversight and available to our children in my community. The SLL, State Liquor Authority, allegedly ruling that it was okay. I requested from my community board, CB9, this ruling that allowed such, and it was never sent. Okay. We also say yes to a quality of life, stopping the businesses of e-bikes, scooters, motorbikes, not following traffic laws on sidewalks, and even unregistered, all in our communities on our corridors. This cannot be a broad stroke. And my community says yes to responsible zoning laws, not developing towers that typically are unaffordable and shadow and knock down trees and destroy green spaces in this global warming crisis that we now find ourselves. Responsible zoning laws that don't allow for 5G, that the science proves are not environmentally safe. We don't want any more bars. We don't want 5G. We want our fundamental essential services provided back to us. You have closed, we have a slew and a sea of for rent signs in our neighborhood. How do you feel about that? Do you agree? Are you going to change any of these 16 broad policies that you speak of? I'm to finish, I think.
Thank you, Maxine.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, and it really, we take into like what you're experiencing in your communities and want to make sure that these sessions are really refining the work that we're all doing here to try to make sure that we are supporting small businesses in this economic crisis that we're in. I don't know, Matt, if there was anything directly that you wanted to just highlight.
Well, I wanted to thank you, Maxine, for sharing your concerns for those of your community members and neighbors, and just wanted to recognize that I hear you, that we hear you, and we take your concerns seriously. It also, if you have something written that you'd like to send to us, we would love to get it. I was taking notes, but I want to make sure that I capture everything. So please send it along to us so we can have the detail of what you were sharing, and just wanted to thank you. And we'll take everything you're saying under consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. If we could now promote Emily Sharp. Just want to make sure the team. Emily, I don't know if you can hear me. We're getting a message that you declined the to be promoted. We're going to try one more time if you and just if you can accept it, and if you'd like to decline, it's okay. We'll try again. And you can also use the Q&A feature if you would like. Okay. Let's move to Lori Willis.
Hi, sorry about that.
No, thank you.
My Zoom was updating. I apologize.
It happens to us all.
Okay. I have this is a broader statement, I guess. Having seen the previous text amendments come down, which started under the prior administration and came rolling out during COVID. At the time, I was the chair of Community Board 10. It was very difficult to get the input that I think that these text amendments really require. And I do, unfortunately, have to agree with the previous speakers. A lot of these ideas are encapsulated. You have individual text amendments that come down. And once they're put into effect, and I often think that they and I don't think, I know that they have been put into effect in the past, prior to the details having been worked out, exactly how these things are going to go into effect, where the exceptions are going to be made, where exactly you can't rely on the fact that we think, well, you have the, maybe businesses have the right to open up on this or that block, but it probably won't work out that way. I really think that there has to be thought. This is a citywide text amendment. There has to be thought about how this is going to change the landscape and the quality of life for the blocks in the outer boroughs. Our city is made up primarily of the outer boroughs. They are primarily residential with corridors, with commercial overlays. As one of the previous speakers was talking about, the current zoning provides that those commercial overlays, the contemplation that of those zoning resolutions that were made back in the 60s were that those establishments were supposed to be establishments that serve a residential community. Your bakery, the things that you need. So you can live there, you can walk to your local store, and you can work there. I do not believe that sitting back and looking at this from just a sheer data analysis or a textbook analysis, where you're saying, well, we've overall seen that, the storefronts are vacant because of the zoning. Yes, that may be true, but that's the wrong analysis. The analysis is not, gee, would a business be there, if it could do whatever it wanted? I mean, obviously it can't do whatever it wanted, but you know what I mean, within reason. The current zoning is appropriate. The quality of life in our neighborhoods has, you say, okay, businesses need help. Yes, they do need help. I can't think of any part of the city that doesn't need help right now. We're having a rough time post-COVID and with other crises that we're dealing with. But to do this text amendment, it's not the answer. I also don't like to say this out loud in this forum, but I'm doing it. I know that a lot of this comes down from above, and there's certain policies and whatever the reasons of those policies are. But I also do feel that community boards, yes, while we still have a voice, they've been lessened. While we still are now, you say, oh, please submit that via email, we'll consider it. That's nice. I understand that you have overall planning job to do for a very vast city that has many different considerations. But I think that these text amendments are coming down piecemeal. And I think that they're too broad. And I think that, the reason for community boards in the first place is because the city is so vast and you need to hear the different needs of the different neighborhoods. One zoning text amendment for an entire city, this does not fit. It is not appropriate. And if you're a person who is in city planning and a person who is involved in architecture and planning, you know this. So I do feel that these programs are being rolled out under a pretext of, hey, let's help the businesses. Of course, the businesses need help. Just because this may be an idea or a shot at an answer, it's not the right answer, because I think that you hear loud and clear from the people who are involved in these communities, you're not improving the community as a community. Yeah, you're bringing more money in probably because you're going to have more businesses, but those businesses are not going to be appropriate for the landscape in which they'll be operating. My opinion. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lori. Really appreciate your really contextualizing the difference and uniqueness of our different neighborhoods and the importance of our city, and as well recognizing that as a city as a whole, we need to be supporting the small businesses and jobs within our city. This is really part of a larger discussion. Zoning is always just one piece of the puzzle. We have all of our partner agencies who are also very much focused on small businesses and creating a workforce for all of us who, live and work in the city. Matt, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, Lori, the only thing I would add is that I appreciate you sharing from your perspective how you think this is not a full solution. And we agree with you that as Lara said, that zoning is only one piece of the puzzle. It's only one set of rules, but it happens to be the set of rules that the city has that we as the Department of City Planning have jurisdiction over. And so we do work with our colleagues at Small Business Services, the Economic Development Corporation, and also community organizations. We've spent well over a year now working with business improvement districts, neighborhood development corporations, and other local entities that their whole job every day is focused on supporting small businesses in predominantly outside of Manhattan in lower density commercial corridors. And so a lot of these changes, these ways in which our zoning needs to leapfrog from the 1961 framework of you're only able to have retail businesses, dry goods retail businesses on your commercial corridors. Our economy has changed away from dry goods retail, and it's continuing to evolve into one that's more based on local services and access to local services and access to the ability for New Yorkers to make things and sell them in the same space. We hear time and time again from organizations that want to support entrepreneurs to be able to make things and sell them in storefronts. They can't do that today. So we're having a proposal that addresses that. You can't have experiential retail or small kinds of amusements in a commercial corridor today. We have a proposal to address that because these are the kinds of businesses that want to locate in storefront spaces but can't because our zoning is prohibiting it and because our zoning predominantly focuses on retail when that was the way that our city's economy was 60 years ago, and it is no longer the way our city's economy is today in any part of the city. And so where we see zoning getting in the way of storefront vacancy, that's what we mean. And so many of these proposals, they're in direct response to what we've heard. We've not even gone into the formal public review process. And I want to highlight how new this is for us as a department to be spending more than a year prior to the beginning of the public process, having proposals that are, yes, not fully formed. We don't have the actual zoning text in some instances ready for you, but that's important because we're soliciting your feedback on these proposals and we have the ability to shape them. And once the text is released and we're entering the formal public review process, we also have the opportunity to shape them based on what we hear from you once you have the actual text. So this process, it's not done yet. We're still going through it and we're going through it together. And so, Lori, again, appreciate your comments this evening, as well as everyone else on the call.
Thanks, Matt. I just want to recognize time. We're at 8:35 and we still have a good amount of people who want to leave comments and stuff. I do want to reiterate economic opportunity at planning.nyc.gov. This will not be, we'll have many more info sessions as well. Just putting that out there, I'm going to go to a couple more of the Q&A questions and then we'll go back to some of the raised hands, recognizing that, I'm sensitive to everybody's time as well. So we are available. We can speak to you offline as well. And with that, Matt, I'm going to go. Sorry, just getting to my.
And I'll try and keep my responses short so we can get through as many questions as possible. That's my commitment to you and everyone else.
Thank you. We'll go to this question from Jeremy. Why is there nothing about last mile trucking in the facilities, which concentrates most of their negative consequences in a few communities? We're just asking for the zoning changes to deal with these facilities. So if you could just talk a little bit about last mile distribution.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Jeremy. We're aware of concerns regarding last mile distribution facilities. So we're working with our city agency partners to understand how to balance the need to have these facilities in the city with the needs of communities who are affected by them. So a land use based solution or a zoning solution for last mile facilities, it needs to be studied at the neighborhood level across the city, and it should be addressed as a part of a separate land use application. So any citywide attempt to regulate last mile facilities would likely trigger an economic impact statement. So that's that higher threshold of environmental review that I mentioned earlier. And that also requires a more lengthy public review process than we have here. So we know they're serious issues, they're complicated issues, and we're looking at them as part of citywide issues. So we're continually looking at it. And thank you for raising that this evening, Jeremy.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the question from Luke. The religious houses of worship might not be for profit. Oh, sorry, my screen is jumping. If people can. Okay. The religious houses of worship might not be for profits. Are there proposed changes to their current zoning restrictions?
There are no proposed changes to their current zoning restrictions. So this is primarily focused on commercial use restrictions.
Okay, thank you. How will you prioritize which ground floor uses like dance and studios are permitted in commercial districts?
Yeah, so we're not prioritizing. So most commercially zoned areas of the city today, they do allow for dance studios, but they're prohibited in certain areas from occupying ground floor space. So there are specific rules in our zoning. You can occupy a dance studio on a second floor, but not a ground floor. So we want to remove those kinds of specific prohibitions.
So this question is about proposal 18, which I believe is the remove time limits on vacancy reactivation of ground floors. How does the community know when there is a zoning issue prohibiting a new business for moving in, or there is a landlord who just doesn't want to rent the space? And it's a follow-up. Once this reaches the community board, will they be able to accept or reject certain proposals, or it is that they would have as of right?
Yeah. So on proposal 12, which is about that time activation, I'll acknowledge that non-conformance it's one of the trickier components of our zoning. So I'm going to attempt to explain it again slightly differently. So non-conforming uses are those that pre-existed a zoning change. So our zoning generally allows for these kinds of uses to remain, provided that the use does not increase in its intensity, otherwise known as its use group. So zoning also says that a non-conforming use like a retail store in a residence district were to be vacant, for that space to be vacant for longer than 2 years, only a conforming use could reoccupy that space. So oftentimes this is too short a duration to get a tenant, especially if it's a down market cycle like we saw during the pandemic. And so these spaces don't necessarily lend themselves to uses like a residence, or other purposes. And so the proposal would extend the time period to be able to re-tenant commercial spaces that are considered non-conforming. So on your broader question, there's a lot of reasons why zoning might be in the way of reoccupying a space. That's what this proposal is all about. So if you're trying to understand whether it's a non-conforming use, you can always check Zola on our website to see whether the address is zoned for commercial or residential. And you can always reach out to our zoning help desk for specific questions about the zoning for a specific site. I would also say on your follow-up question about once this reaches community boards, whether you're able to accept or reject certain proposals or all or nothing. So community boards, as part of this process, they're required for an up or down vote to approve with the conditions, or deny or disapprove with conditions the proposal as a whole. But we're also wanting your feedback on each of the component parts. And so it's up to you if you're a community board member, or it's up to the community board member or the community board how they want to do this. But something that we've seen recently in some of our work in Staten Island is that the community board actually voted on each of the component parts of the proposal, which is really, really helpful to myself, to us, to the rest of us at City Planning, and understanding, okay, this is a very large proposal. There are 19 different parts of it. Maybe you like 3, 6, 9, and 12, but you don't like 14 and 18, or you might like one of them, but with a change. And we really want that feedback. We want to know for each of these component parts what you like, what you don't like, what you want to see changed. because it helps us in our process be able to do that. If you just say no without giving us any explanation, well, that's harder for us to understand why you're voting no and what you might want to see changed. So I hope that helps. And for anyone else who's still listening in, who's a member of a community board, we'll provide you with some more guidance on this.
Okay, so I'm going to do another question from the Q&A. I'm just trying to get through them all. This one's from Molly that I thought was really interesting, as well as all the other ones. With all of these proposed updates, what kind of attention is being given to ensuring or even improving the physical accessibility of these spaces for disabled New Yorkers? This is the question we haven't got quite yet.
Yeah, thank you, Molly, for this question, and it's really important. So typically, investment in upgrades or construction of new space does require that space to come into compliance with Americans with Disability Act or ADA standards. So while this proposal does not specifically address accessibility, it does encourage it in the sense that it encourages new spaces and new investment, which therefore would trigger ADA. So if you're interested in learning more about a project that we at the Department of City Planning have done that's more directly about accessibility, you might want to take a look at the Elevate Transit Zoning for Accessibility project that we did about a year ago with the MTA, which is helping to create new elevators in new buildings along our transit lines. So you can find more information about this project on our website. But thanks again for the question.
Okay, so I want to go to a couple of people who haven't been able to ask questions yet in the raised hands. Doris Cruz, if you can promote and you'll get a notice to accept or deny the promotion into speaking role.
Thank you. I want to thank you for the presentation, and I want to thank all of the attendees who have participated and made comments. And I would say I am a member of Community Board 10, but I am not representing the board. But there was a consistent theme, and that theme is we are residential communities, and you're only looking at the commercial aspect of it. Community Board 10 has a manufacturing area at its northern end and some commercial high commercial areas that's C6 through 8. We have a C8 district in near the southern part, but the rest of our commercial districts are residential districts with a commercial overlay. And as someone clearly stated, that the overlay are businesses that serve the community, and they are there to serve the residents. And I think that's something that must be taken into consideration. I also want to note that it's the use of apartments and second stories is good, but it's contradictory to the Department of City Planning's need for more housing. The second floor on many of our commercial strips are currently residential, and taking them away is problematic. I could go on, but I think most of my issues have been covered. But I would also add, there was also a consistent theme in the people speaking that, yes, we send you our comments, you hear them, but from our perspective, you do not heed them. Thank you.
Thank you, Doris.
Thank you, Doris.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. No, I think we're hearing loud and clear, like we all want to make sure that the services and the needs and the type of stores we need in our residential areas, including myself, I mean, we all live in the city as well, have availability and accessibility into our communities. So we want to continue to focus on small businesses, but we recognize, you know, the uniqueness of it. And that's why we're having these conversations, and to continuously shape this proposal. And a reminder that it's not just about zoning, as we mentioned in the previous comment. There are many other partner agencies who are also working to support communities in our neighborhoods with the small businesses that we need. Matt, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, but I want to make sure that we can we're getting very close to 9 o'clock, and I know that's it's been a long meeting for us all, which has been great. Being able to hear all of your comments. And again, this won't be the last info session. There'll be plenty more in the future. I'm going to go to Samuel Goodman, who has his hand raised. Team, if you could just let me know if Samuel is able to be promoted. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Samuel. Yes, we can hear you.
Hey, all right. Thank you so much, everybody. My name is Sam Goodman. I've been working as an urban planner for the Bronx Borough President's Office since 1995. I live on the Grand Concourse. My family came to the Grand Concourse in the 1920s. So between myself and my family's history here, I've seen a lot of things happen. And as a consequence of my professional involvement in this and many other issues, I realize the challenges you all have before you. Having said that, what I'd like to understand is, given all the proposals you've made as it relates to the different aspects here, number one, what enforcement provisions are going to be thought about as it relates to how, for example, if a landlord has a vacant apartment, he can convert it to a retail venue, and that gives him a financial incentive to do so, since retail venues are not subject to rent regulations as our rent stabilization laws mandate for residents. Number two, signage. On the Grand Concourse, where virtually most commercial functions are not permitted under current zoning, those regulations pursuant to the Grand Concourse Preservation District's mandates are fundamentally abandoned. What provisions are being made in relation to the new zoning ordinances you're considering to require that these enforcements be made? And I guess, in general, I'm really concerned that while the intention here is obviously admirable, there needs to be some additional issues associated with this element of enforcement. Does anyone want to tackle that question?
Matt, you want to
Sure.
take a crack?
Well, thank you for your question, your perspective, and especially for your service to the city. You noted Grand Concourse a couple of times, both as the area where you live, but also as a place where there is some unique throughout our city zoning rules. So in my response, I'm going to kind of talk about generally how we think about our underlying zoning. But I also want to note here that we, not just Grand Concourse, but we have many special districts, special purpose districts, and different other kinds of zoning designations. So yes, this is a citywide action. We want to make sure that we have consistency between the idea behind the changes we're making in our special districts. But all of that aside, you're asking about enforcement. And so typically both the interpreters and enforcers of our zoning is the Department of Buildings. And so that's true of any of the proposals today, when a building is going to change from one use to another use, if they're changing their use group or if there's some sort of significant alteration, they have to go to the Department of Buildings. You have a plan examiner who comes out and they make sure that you're abiding by not just zoning, but a whole host of life and safety concerns that the city and state have put in place. Now, when there is some sort of activity that is going on that creates a concern, the main way that we solicit that sort of concern is through 311. And those concerns get routed to the Department of Buildings, who collates, collects them, and dispatches a plan examiner. Depending on the issue, there may be other agencies that get involved, but that's typically the process. And so we've been working very closely with the Department of Buildings throughout this proposal development in understanding both how their interpretation of zoning works today and how we can make sure that DOB is better able to do their jobs by making our zoning more clear and more simple and more consistent. And so through those goals, we are making it easier for DOB to do its job and able to interpret and enforce our zoning. So thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to take one more question from a person who has dialed in. This is phone number 086 is the last 3 digits of your phone number. We will just unmute you and feel free. Sorry, I don't have your name, but if you could unmute and we will. Hi.
Hi. I wanted to add a few statements to the collective that has been already talked about. One was there's a whole idea that the vacancy for businesses is because of zoning and that we're focusing on small businesses. However, even when we're talking about going into a community that's predominantly residential and putting a business there, and that business having to go through the process of doing an application, that's normally a developer. Those are developers. Those are landlords that do that because it's very expensive. As you said, it's an arduous task. They have to lobby their elected officials, they have to lobby DCP, they have to fill out applications, they have to have plans. This is done not through small businesses, this is done through developers in the real estate industry. There's also another aspect of your zoning where you're saying that if you're going to put these commercial properties onto buildings, you're going to have to now have a separate entrance. And so that people who are going up to the top floor will have a separate entrance from the residential. Again, that's a developer. That's not small businesses. Small businesses can't come and change the physical layout of a building. That's what developers do. Developers make these major changes, and then they sell the land to someone or sell and rent the land to someone, a big commercial space. So your focus on, it's all businesses, small businesses, is very disingenuous because a lot of these rules will never be entertained by small businesses. They will be entertained by developers in the real estate industry. And finally, we all know that this is Eric Adams' plan. He met with developers. He met with the real estate industry. He came with this plan. Nothing has changed from the original plan that I heard a year and a half ago underneath the City of Yes. We want bars everywhere. We want dancing everywhere. We want to allow commercial, places to be everywhere that they want to be. We want to merge the manufacturing with the commercial, and we want to then have the commercial everywhere. So I haven't really seen you give all the lip service about listening to the community and how you're so anxious to hear what we have to say and, we're going to listen. But each time you come back to us, you have the same plan. You haven't changed anything. And we all know this is Eric Adams' plan, along with all of his little buddies that he hangs out with on the weekends and go parties with. So I feel that what people need to do, if you really want to make a dent in this, is not talk to DCP, who's just taking the orders from Eric Adams' office, is to get down on Eric Adams and let him know he's a one-term mayor if he thinks he's going to come into residential communities and turn them into commercial spots where everybody just partying and dancing and there's liquor and there's all this stuff, or going into residential apartments and now having businesses. That's what needs to be done. You need to start focusing on Eric Adams, because DCP is going to do exactly what he's doing. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I didn't catch your name. Sorry, we only have your phone number.
That's all you need.
Okay.
Okay.
So thank you for your comments. Matt, I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, you talked about small business, so I just want to make sure that I talk about small business here in our zoning and why we're doing this. So our zoning is really difficult and complicated for small businesses in particular to understand what to do. And it's even more difficult and complicated in many parts because it's not been updated since the 60s. Our commercial use regulations in particular have not been updated in over 60 years. The way that we define what kinds of businesses go in our commercial overlays hasn't changed in 60 years, despite our economy looking vastly different than it did in the 1960s. And so what this means for a small business, oftentimes, if they don't know they can locate and the zoning isn't clear that they can locate, they have to go to DOB and clarify, hire a land use attorney, hire an engineer to tell them that they can locate, in fact, just in any storefront space. That could cost them 6 months. It could cost them lost rent if they signed a lease. So when we talk about small business and why this is important, that's why this is important. We want to simplify and modernize our zoning for our small businesses so that it's much more clear on what they can do with their space for the businesses, for the residents, and for the people like the Department of Buildings who interpret and enforce our zoning. So that's why we're doing this work. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm very clear on where this came about and why we're doing this work and why it's so important. So thank you all for your time this evening. Lara, I'll hand things back to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you so much, everybody, for attending. We really appreciate being able to share the things that we've learned through this proposal development, and certainly want to keep refining it. So we'll, like I said, we'll continue to have these. We will continue to talk to neighbors and organizations, and of course, our community boards. So please, look out for those as well. You can stay in touch with us if you go to our DCP website. There is a newsletter that you can sign up for. And you can also stay in touch with us through an economic opportunity at planning.nyc.gov, which is an email that goes directly to us. And with that, we will close out the night. Thank you so much for everybody joining us. Thank you for staff for your help from back of house, and to you, Matt.